My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people that we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that sourcing and procurement plays in the way we live. If you like today's episode, make sure to rate the program and give us a follow. Today's episode, we have a guest that has spent many years in procurement. She has a perspective that procurement has been spending years themselves trying to earn this title of strategic advisor. But maybe that's the wrong goal entirely. Maybe the better version of procurement is less about advising from the sidelines and more about becoming a true decision partner inside the enterprise. Today's guest has built, rebuilt, and embedded procurement teams across tech, retail, healthcare, grocery, and outsourced procurement environments with a point of view that is refreshingly blunt. Process matters, but people comes first. She's worked across procurement, product marketing, sales, pre-sales, and client engagement, which gives her a pretty rare lens on what procurement gets right, what it overcomplicates, and why the function might just need to have a serious rebrand. She believes in a wholly human approach to procurement, breaking process when it no longer serves the business, and, as she puts it, she is nothing if not opinionated. Thank you very much to KR Barron for coming in and sharing your opinions with us here today on The Way We Source. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. I'm glad to be here.
We're happy to
Quite
have you.
often. I'm sorry if I'm giggling over on my side.
Well, hey, I think that you deserve it. Was it accurate? Is my first question.
Um, that might be what I'm laughing about is yes, it seemed very accurate.
All right. Well, good to hear. One check in the box then, as far as the episode goes. You said something to me that immediately stuck out in the pre work that we did for the episode. You said that procurement shouldn't just be trying to become a strategic advisor. As we said in the intro, it should become a true business partner. What do you think that the true difference is between those two things, KR?
Yeah, you mentioned it a little bit in the intro around, strategic advisors often being on the sideline, right? And not really
Mm,
directly involved in the decisions that are being made, and really the sort of like end to end process of it all. And the reason why I say end to end process
mm,
is because I think from when we think about procurement, we think about like source to procure, source to pay sort of motions, and that's great. But getting involved at the sourcing stage to me is honestly far too late for procurement. We need to
mm.
be in the room where it happens. We need to be in team meetings, department meetings. We need to literally be a factor of everyday life within business and become business partners. That means we are collaborating on everything. Marketing has this idea about this thing they want to do next year. We're in those
Yeah.
conversations. We're ideating. We're having sort of influence right at the beginning versus further along in the process where people have already made decisions and already have their mindset on something. At that point, it's a little too late for procurement to come in and generally be able to change the path or change the direction that we're moving in.
That's fair, and I talked about this with another guest that we've had recently that said that it's innately human, right? That people wanna buy, but then the contract typically gets thrown over the fence to procurement to go and manage. You're taking a perspective of ideation and influence, which is, like you said, part of procurement being involved even prior to the sourcing process, whereas also during the sourcing process, strong alignment as well. And in aiding in the process, should it not, of course, become policing, as we've talked about as well, which we'll get to. I'm just
Right. Of
curious, like in practice, right? Because it all sounds really, really good on paper, right?
course.
Um, in practice, though, like how does procurement actually get in a position to be a partner that people want to ideate and give influence to in the process?
Yeah. It's sort of like that typical, like, thing we either see on TV or we've experienced in our personal lives of, like, you're the new kid and it's lunchtime. And you walk into the cafeteria and you're like, "Where the heck do I sit? Where am I gonna be welcomed?" I think too often for procurement, we beeline straight to the people we know are gonna make us comfortable, and we sit at that
Hmm.
table and we stay at that table, where we actually need to be rotating through the lunchroom. Okay, go to each table, make your
Interesting.
introductions, sit down. I used to say a lot of times, like, stop waiting being invited to the table. Make your own table. Well, yeah, you do want
Right.
to have your own table, but you also want to be able to go sit at any other table in the room at the same time. So there needs to be a little bit of fearlessness in our approach on things. I think we're so used to being told no, we're so used to being excluded, so we kind of feed into that mentality a little bit, instead of going like, "Hey, director of marketing or CMO, I'm gonna join your team meetings." Oftentimes, the director or the CMO will go, "Why?" Like, "Why do you need to be here and you're just gonna be a
Right.
distraction?" Or, "Why we might be talking about something confidential." Cool. You guys need to talk about something confidential that I shouldn't know about, kick me out. You're not gonna hurt my feelings by asking me to leave a conversation I shouldn't be a part of. If I'm not
Mm,
supposed to be a part of something, I shouldn't be a part of it. However, everything else, we're in the same business. Like,
mm,
why wouldn't I be able to come in to your team meeting? I wanna learn. I wanna learn about what you're doing. I wanna become ingrained in your team. The best way
mm.
to become a part of something is to be a part of it, right? And so I've, for years now, stopped asking people to join my meetings or come to my office hours. I am literally going into department level meetings, going into team meetings, sitting there. You see me, you get used to me being around. Someone says something, maybe I have a helpful comment. Being helpful and being seen, I think, is the first step to becoming that business partner because people see you around all the time. They actually assume you're already part of things. And when people assume you're part of things, they naturally include you in those things.
Very interesting approach. I love this perspective of not getting comfy, but going and inserting yourself in different situations, sitting at various lunch tables, right? And doing so also in a way that is a innocent bystander, but also can be able to offer support and help when and where needed. I'm curious to that point. How does a business, an enterprise ensure that the culture is there and or procurement leadership ensure that that becomes a part of the culture that is accepted, right? Because to
Yeah.
your exact same point, that requires functional leaders to not only be okay with procurement being in the loop, but in certain aspects also wanting that that is the case, right?
Mhm.
Early in the process or in their day to day. Yeah, could you talk a little bit to the culture maybe shift that needs to happen in a business or what needs to be right in the culture?
Yeah, absolutely. A few things. One, you have to have a spirit of transparency, within the company and the culture, and, this is really like a building mindset as well, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
building and open together. Not every company has that. Most companies say they do, but not every one of them does. So,
Mm,
what I did, because I actually experienced this when I first had this idea of like, "Why like, I just need to get in." I just need to be there all the
right.
time. Um, I started meeting with the leaders, very honestly. Started meeting with those leaders, having discussions with them, really being fully transparent and honest about what my intention is. If I just say, "Hey, I
Mhm.
want to join meetings because I want to learn things and I just want people to, want to talk to procurement," nobody cares. Like, nobody cares about that. But if I get to know the department head, I know what's important to them. And then I can start speaking to that piece of it. Hey, you're having trouble in your department, with understanding what your next step is. I hear that. I understand that. I'd love to come in and sit in your meetings and see if I can learn anything new. And then you and I might be able to collaborate on a possible solution together.
Right.
So it's staying very solution focused, but also understanding what's important to them. We say all the time things like we need to speak the department's language, right? We need to put
Right.
things in a way that makes sense to them. That is not just in how we approach procurement, that's how we approach business, right? I also look for allies amongst the team. If I have a great relationship with maybe a senior manager or a manager or a director on the team, they can help me get in with that department leader, right? They can speak on my behalf. Hey, KR really, she helped me a lot on this last deal, and I think she brings a lot to the table. Let's bring
Yeah.
her in so she can help all of us. I also try to align with other leaders in the organization. So I know, again, I'm going to pick on marketing because they're one of my favorite teams. But if, like, I know marketing almost always the first budget to get cut, right? They're under intense budget pressures to deliver
Yeah.
really critical work for the business, right? And they are, I
Yeah.
think, constantly feeling like they're on the chopping block because they are to a certain extent. And so I know that for marketing, one thing that's usually important is whatever money they save to be able to use for something else. So I find that
Yeah.
alignment very early with my finance partners. And then
Hmm.
I go to marketing with that. Hey, if I'm in your meetings and I'm hearing what's going on, I can actually figure out and strategize around how I can turn this win into an additional win over here. If I don't have that insight and visibility, I can't help you do that. I can't ensure you get that money back for something else. So it's also about what are you going to
Yeah.
get if I'm there? And what do you risk if I'm not there?
Yeah. And this is where also savings becomes true value creation, which I think that a lot of people talk about, right? But that's a very practical example as to how it can become realized. You mentioned that there needs to be a spirit of transparency and be focused on a culture of being builders, which I think is a in the AI era, particularly in technology, the industry I'm in, it's a well accepted and adopted methodology, mode of operating, and also, I think orgs are getting flatter, middle management's
Yeah.
disappearing, particularly in the software and AI space that I operate within, right? And I know that you have also operated in that particular space. You've also operated though in quite a few other, industries, not just tech, retail, healthcare, grocery. You've been in a few different contexts, and at
Yeah.
Logic Source, obviously you're finding yourself in various other contexts, of course, helping other enterprises with their ways of working. And I want to get to that, but I do want to be able to understand, where does it not work, right? You because let's be honest, we're not talking about deep direct material sourcing where there is requirement on category expertise, or are we, right? I'm just challenging this notion a little bit, and I want to hear your perspective because you've been in other contexts that are more focused on a direct material sourcing approach. Does it still work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It doesn't always at first though. Sometimes
Mm,
you have to work to make it work, and that's okay. So for example, when I'm in healthcare, very rarely do people think they are builders, right? Like they're not building healthcare. They are often very heavily regulated, trying to follow a whole bunch of rules and get things
right.
done in a way that best serves the people while also maintaining compliance. But they
Mm,
actually are builders. So you have to just put it in the right frame of reference, right? It's like your work in healthcare is so incredibly important, right? When we're talking about healthcare systems, that impacts every single one of us. And so it's just turning that no, we're not building technology and we're not in that same even, like hyper growth sort of startup phase where it's like build, and everyone do it together and, fail fast. There's actually not a lot of opportunity to fail in something like a healthcare system because
right.
the are so great, right? But we're
Right.
still building, we're just building differently. We're building something else. So fine, we're not builders. You know what we are? We are people of service. We're serving people in something so deeply personal to them. And it's so important.
Mm,
And so you just have to find the thing that speaks to the people within the organization. That's your building block to start calling people builders, right? Like, figure out
yeah.
what that thing is that's important and then key in on that. So with healthcare, it's like, hey, we're servicing people. And in order to service people the very best that we can, we have to start like at -2, not even 0. When it's in groceries, same thing. We're feeding this country, right? Like if our trucks don't get out, things don't get to the store, they spoil. It's not just a
Yeah.
loss to the grocer, it's a loss to the consumer. Right? And
Mm.
especially right now with, we have more and more food deserts all the time. We have more and
Right.
more inflation, people having to make choices, really hard choices on what they're putting in their shopping carts. Again, that's then the motivating factor. So maybe it's not building out in the open, but it's we are responsible for putting food on people's table. And so because we're responsible for that, we have to start here to make sure that we can, fulfill our promise to our customers.
I think that the thing that you're getting into that's really, really, really interesting is, because we in the intro I mentioned about, this aspect of procurement needing a rebrand. And I think that a lot of procurement professionals and other, people that work with content and are experts in the space have been talking about this for a long time.
Mhm,
In
mhm.
reality, though, right, what you're hitting on is determining what are the driving factors in this business that gives procurement purpose, and
Absolutely.
how can I be able to then also sell in certain ways or market that particular idea, right?
Mhm.
Ensure that this is at the core, that the mission statements, right, of what we're trying to accomplish together guides our joint behavior as functional leader and
Yep.
procurement person working in tandem, right? And I think that that is such a strategic approach, and it's a human approach. So I want to shift to a little bit about this perspective that you talked about at some of the pre-work that we spoke about with this concept of holy human procurement. Holy being not holy as in religious, holy, WHOLLY,
The whole thing.
human procurement. Yes. So what exactly does that mean in practice?
Yeah. So it is quite literally, and this may sound reductive, but it is just putting people first. Like, people should
Mm.
be first in everything. And in my opinion, that's not just procurement, that should be business in general. I think we've gotten very far away from that, whether that's our people as customers or our people as employees. It seems that we kind of come back to it. There's phases where in business we come back to wanting to put people first, but we stray away from that as soon as we think that might impact our bottom line or might ruffle feathers somewhere.
I have to jump in. Do you
Yes,
think the pendulum's swinging the other way due to elements of AI or?
I think there's a lot of things. I think the temperature right now, just in general in our country, is very, anti doing things for each other, being
Hmm.
there for each other, being
Interesting.
fully human with each other. So I think there's a temperature right now, just across the board in our country. I think in business, yeah, AI is definitely part of it. I think, inflation is a part of it and people trying to protect margins and make sure that their
Mm.
business fit the next year.
Right.
Investors, right? There's far less VC and far more PE investment
Right.
right now, and, I'm a fan of all types of investment, but, we do see huge cultural difference between venture capitalism and private equity, right?
True.
We see private
True.
equity generally very, very numbers driven, and that is it, where VCs tend to be a bit more experimental, a bit more like, let's see how it goes, and they give businesses a bit more room to play. So I think the environment has a lot to do with it, both, just our culture as a whole, as well as what's happening in business. Um, but, I think I see some people do it really well. And then I see some people try to do it, but lose their way in it because there's a lot of other bright, shiny things, especially from a
Mm.
board perspective, that people think you should be focused on instead of people.
I think that it's an interesting concept, right? And you open up for this perspective of the environment that we're in right now and keeping humans at the center of it. And I think that in a lot of ways, procurement needs to be experts of their environment and multiple environments, right? In an ecosystem. They really need to be attuned to wearing so many different hats. And I think that that requires a particular profile. So I am super curious, KR, right? Because the way that you're speaking, obviously, it would probably come out of the mouth of somebody working in sales or marketing. No
Yeah,
offense to those working in procurement, right?
yeah.
And I think that, I've met ton of procurement professionals that give the role an entirely different face, an entirely different name, and that is exactly why we started this particular podcast, right? Because it doesn't need to be in the box of procurement follows the source to pay, source to procure process, and that's their only job, right? So
Mhm.
I'm curious from hearing from you, how did you make your way into this world? Did you choose it or did it choose you?
Ooh, it chose me. Like a lot of us, I really fell right into procurement. I was a project manager at a market research company, servicing a major, well-known media and toy brand. And I just one day was sitting there going like, "Gosh, I see this gap and this it's just driving me crazy how we're approaching this problem for the client. I just feel like we're not doing the thing." And so I went to my boss at the time and said, "Hey," his name was Dan. "Dan, like what are we doing? I actually think we should be doing this thing. And I think this is how it plays out and how it would service the client." And he kind of chuckled and was like, "You're not wrong, but that's sourcing." And you're in project management. So, like, yeah, you're right, but you're doing the wrong thing then.
You need to get
So
earlier in the chain. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
and so he was like, "Why don't you do that for this client,
Mm.
but go join the sourcing team to do it for this client." And I did, and I fell right in love with procurement, very honestly. I loved at that time we were in SQL. We were pulling our own sort of sample and panelists for market research and collaborating with partners. And so I was nerding out in SQL and also breaking SQL and crashing the database all the time, which was my favorite thing to do, much to the chagrin of our data teams. But I was learning that, and this was early 2000s, so it was only spreadsheets. It was only things,
Right.
a lot of handwritten things as well. And so I was geeking out in that, but then I was having all these client conversations and talking to sales so much and negotiating with our supplier networks. And so it really sort of spoke to both sides of me, the introvert that just wants to hole away and do some work and not have to talk to somebody, and the extrovert that loves being around people and loves engaging and helping solve problems in a collaborative nature.
Very cool. I love hearing people's journey in, and it sounds like you had a journey in that was rather organic, and it found you, but it sounds like you found it while it found you as well, which is very nice to hear. You mentioned it there, right? Procurement people in the processes, they love processes, and processes are important.
Mhm.
Um, at what point this process kind of stop, creating control and just start creating drag within the business?
Yeah. I think, it depends, right? It depends on, I think, the situation, the company, but I would say in general, any time where one or more people kind of look and go like, "Well, does that make sense?" Like, "What's taking too long?" Or, "Do we need to go through that type of review?" I'm actually going through it right now, with my current client, where I was on a call this morning going like, "Y'all, this actually doesn't make sense. We're using a workflow orchestration tool, and we're doing all these things with one of the what I think most people call best in class,
Mm.
P2P or S2P tools on the market. And even still, with one of the best pieces of technology, We're finding that, reviews are falling into black holes. We're finding that we are likely over rotating on those reviews and pulling privacy into things they don't need to be involved in. And that's adding to the cycle time, adding to stakeholder confusion and frustration. We're also allowing procurement to act as the only point of escalation. So whether it's
Hmm.
privacy or data or infosec, only
Interesting.
procurement is getting hammered when things are happening. That is process for process sake. That is not
Mm.
process to help usher things through. That is not process to help people get what they need to do their jobs the best that they can. That is just BS process because somebody probably was told or heard somewhere around the line that that was best in class procurement process, best in class way to look at something. Best in class is only best in class if it makes sense for what you're doing. So I'm a big
So
fan
true.
of yeah, I'm a big fan of breaking process. I'm a big fan of making exceptions. I'm a big fan of saying, well, what actually makes sense here? So maybe normally for this type of software purchase, we'd want to go through all these reviews and we'd want a 12-week POC and we'd want
Right,
a
right.
meeting after that and doing all of that. But this actually is not a business critical system. It's not going to be touching client data. It's not push pulling anything that we would consider to be too, too delicate or too sensitive. So why? Yes, we still need legal approval. We still need InfoSec approval. We need privacy and data, of course, because it's still integrating into our system. But we don't need the full blown review. We don't need the same type of review as if this were connecting to a CRM or an ERP. We don't actually have to do that same thing. And we don't need a 12-week POC because it's not that deep. It's just is
Right.
not that critical. So let's do a 2-week POC,
Yeah.
make sure the one function we need to function functions, and let's move let's move the heck on from this and stop wasting everyone's time. And I find when we
Yeah.
figure those things out and we solve those in real time and we do that in a very collaborative nature. So I'm not making this decision without infosec or without legal or without privacy. I'm going in to all
No.
these people saying, hey, here's what should happen. Here's why. Big emphasis on the why. Here's the why. Here's what we risk if we follow the standard practice. Here's what we gain if we don't. Is there a risk if we don't? Sure. Here's what it is. Do we accept that risk or not? Um, Form a consensus and keep it moving. And I think, again, when you
Yeah.
do that collaboratively, you do that in the open, people see it, people appreciate it, and then people trust you because they know you're not just going to stick to policy or process for policy or process sake. You're actually a
Yeah.
business partner that is helping them solve
Right.
their.
And when it's all said and done, that's the thing, right? Procurement is a commercial function and sometimes needs to determine how do we, for example, I think it's the Picasso quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it, so I'll paraphrase, right? But, uh, do the technique like a technician and play on the boundaries like an artist. It's something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the thing that is it's a very fine line, I think, within business, but it's required in a commercial function, in marketing, sales, as well as in procurement, right? And I'm curious to hear your perspective. Like, what is the practical ways that procurement can start separating, hey, this is what our required process is, um, or excuse me, from what's required versus what we've just always done this way, and how to be able to start navigating around that. Do you
Yeah.
understand the kind of the question that I'm getting at?
I think so. I think so. But so I'm going to start to answer it and then stop me. You're like, nope,
All right,
that's not
G-
it at all.
go for it. Go for it.
So, I think there's a few things here. One, process. My three ethos, honestly, for procurement are digestible, repeatable, scalable.
Mm.
Everything we do, every last thing has to be easy to digest. If people can't chew on it and swallow it, they're not going to engage with it, right?
So true.
It's right. Like if I can't actually take a bite out of something and get it down, I'm going to spit it right back out. And it is what it is at that point. If it's not repeatable, if it's not something I can engage in at least similarly every single time, then is too hard and I'm not gonna do it because now your work is my work. And I say all the time, don't make your problems my problems. Don't make your work my work. Like, don't add your to-do list to my to-do list. My to-do list is long enough right now. So has to be something I can do all the time without really having to put a ton of effort into it and remember a lot of rules. And then scalable. Everything we do today impacts what we're doing tomorrow, on and on and on. Right. So when we're thinking about separating things like, hey, maybe we've been really loose with how we've done things so far, there hasn't been a policy or process, and now we're doing that. One, it is has to make sense. Right. So
Right.
are we just slapping process on because we wanna be able to go back to leadership and say, "Hey, we have controls here and there, and yay us," or are we
Right.
contributing something? Are you contributing or are you detracting? Everything has to contribute. So, we wanna do this almost in bite-sized chunks, right? We can't just change everything in one day and expect people to be able to swim through that. We have to go, "Hey, we're introducing maybe process, and we're going to layer technology on top of that, and then we're going to
Right.
layer policy on top of that and layer and layer. So, whether it's a cake or an onion, either way, we're creating layers here.
Mm.
Some people, are fans of Shrek, and some people are fans of Ratatouille, so we're gonna use both there. Um,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
but
Fantastic.
so we really have to make sure we're approaching it in a way that makes sense. Change management, right? So staying people focused.
Yeah.
How are we going to get people to engage in this? Then there's also the always an exception, right? There's always an exception
Right.
because every day in business, we are determining what risks we're willing to take and what we're willing to tolerate. Every day in business, no matter what department you're in, no matter what it is you're selling, no matter what it is you're taking in, you are determining what risks are worth it to you. Same thing has to happen in procurement. We have, I think, this mindset of like, all risks are bad risks. No, that's why we have risk teams is to tell us which risk is actually not that terrible. So I also try to
Mm.
set thresholds and tolerance levels immediately so that as we're standing things up, we're not having to squabble over things like a 10K event agreement. Like make it easy for people. Make it so that people can
Right.
self-serve to a certain degree and get things done quickly.
Yeah.
And then the things that matter actually, then now we're getting into process over. Okay. So if we have templates that we can lean into boilerplate agreements, hey, here's the things you can use those boilerplate agreements for. Bye. Get your PO done, make sure that happens. Other than that, this couldn't be any easier for you. But hey, this thing here, here's why we need to spend more time on it. It opens us up to XY risks. We've decided as a company we can't take those risks on, so we have to address them,
Yeah.
right? I also like doing things like simplify things in a chart. It sounds, again, so reductive to a certain degree or so elementary for people, but this type of request, this is what's required. This is an estimated timeline based on a medium level complexity. Here are the teams you're going to interact with. Here's a link right to your intake form, right? So it's also, again, making things digestible and repeatable for people so that they know, yes, things are changing, but by gosh, it's not that hard to interact with these changes.
Mm. Good insights, and I think that it highlights, for example, like you said, the value that procurement has to add without becoming a laborious process policer, which is the last thing that anyone wants to be called, I believe. Um,
Yes.
you mentioned there, for example, the almost in a lot of ways, kind of almost segmenting a buying decision, right? Whether it be, for example, on spend or risk. Do you believe in a segmentation methodology? There's classics out there like Crowdjick, right? Kind of the birth of supplier relationship management, risk of supply versus, for example, the impact on revenue as a plotting, right, of a four quadrant perspective. Do you work within any of those types of methodologies to be able to determine, hey, and if so, what are do you think some of the most crucial impacts to a business that you would then segment based upon?
Yeah, I actually don't really work within a lot of other methodologies. Like, very honestly, if I hear
Mm,
something and I like it, if I've seen
mm,
it and it's successful,
yeah.
great, but I'm more than likely going to put my very own spin on it.
Mm,
I'm more than likely going to take a concept and bring it to my collaborators, like legal, privacy, data, infosec, and come up with our own version of it, right?
yeah.
Like, it's so I'm never I try not to go like, "Hey, here's this way of doing it. We need to do it this way." It's more like, "Hey, here's this idea.
Yeah.
How can we actually, like, take this really good idea and make it make sense for us?" Um, so you mentioned segmentation is interesting. I've actually never really thought of it like that, but yeah, I was saying it like that, huh? So I guess I do it. But so that was actually very subconscious of me. I didn't know I was doing that while I was doing it. So I love these types of conversations because sometimes like, oh my gosh, you're right. About something I learned something about myself. But I do think it's important to not treat every purchase the same, right? Like, not all purchases are equal, not all risks are equal, not all needs are equal. So, yeah, I guess segmentation does play into that quite a bit.
Mm,
And I think it's actually an important thing that we often overlook. We tend to be very general and very blanket with how we approach things in procurement, and I do think that
right.
that is damaging to us.
Yeah. Um, when you look at your career across various industries, I think that if you ask most people in sales, what's a deal that you've cut and you had to work really hard or get creative about? And I think that you probably have you've spoken today about the human element of procurement and kind of playing on the boundaries of process and determining when is it necessary or not, which means that obviously you're probably a creatively commercial person in procurement, right? Which is a great aspect and a great attribute, I believe. I think that the same thing is required on both sides of the coin, whether you're in sales and procurement. And you could probably ask the majority of salespeople, hey, what's a deal that you had to get creative in and you remember for reason X, Y, and Z? I love asking procurement people the same thing. What's a deal that you remember in your career that you had to get creative in? And can you tell us a little bit more about that anecdote?
Oh gosh. I mean, there's so many. I know one where I almost tanked a deal and had to get super creative and there's also, I think
Would
we all
love to hear that one.
okay. That's
Yeah,
alright. So,
would also love to hear a win as well. but but
sure.
the learning and the potential failure, that's also very interesting for the listeners, of course. Yeah.
It was one of my first deals when I entered the tech space. And it was with a survey, a
Mm,
market research, partner, which I was like, "Great, I just came from 13 years in market research. This is a slam dunk for me." So, I was very bullish, and I went into this negotiation without doing any prep work because I assumed I was so smart, and I knew all the things because this was
mm,
my very previous life and existence. And I knew this company incredibly well. I'd partnered with them many times, in my market research career. And so I went in and I was like, "You know what? I know based on, like, my history, this is a good number to toss out." So I did. I was just like, "Give me this number," and I think it was like $100,000 or something like that. I was like, "Give me it for $100,000." And they were like, "What? $100,000? That's crazy, but okay, we'll see what we can do." Well, they come back 2 days later, "Okay, we can meet the 100K." I walk up to my boss like full peacocking. I'm so proud of myself. Look at me. I got this $100,000 and I know they never give anyone $100,000. And I walk in and I'm like, this is it. And my boss was so ticked off because $100 was actually not a good deal for us. It was not taking into
mm,
account where our previous contract was, where our growth was headed, the changes in the services that we were obtaining. I just was like, "Oh, I'm the best and I got this done." And so he was ticked and I had to then get really creative in why that them meeting exactly what I demanded of them was not right anymore. Um, and so I went back and was like, "Hey, things have changed and this is now the target and here's what we're anchoring to and this is what we need." And Oh my gosh, did I make an enemy of that? Hey, Evan, if you're listening, I'm still sorry about this, because he might still hate me. But his name was Evan. I won't say his last name. But Evan, I apologize still for this. And I think he basically knew that I was, like, lying through my teeth, and I think at one point I kinda admitted, like, "Look, I kinda made a mistake, and let's both get creative here and
Yeah.
figure out what we can do." But what I did was with my creative, parts is we'd had a bunch of overages, and we were kinda just a bad client, to the supplier, so they also were pissed at me because I held them to something, coming back to and they're like, "You're not a good client ever, and this is just one more example of this." And so I actually came up with a program for us to monitor and how we would interact
Hmm.
on the contract and become a better client with them,
Hmm.
and be more forthcoming and have more, quarterly meetings with them. That was something we had committed to, and we had never done it. So I actually put my name on that quarterly meeting. I'm going to show up every quarter. I'm going to be the person that's having these conversations and driving this internally here. So I created sort of this like different form of partnership in terms of our engagement. So I got creative there with offering them something. But I also just got creative in like, how do I crawl out of this hole that I literally created on
Right.
my first deal here? And it ended up working out.
And work together with the supplier as well to be able to get creative, right? Just again, back to the human element, taking down the guard and not holding the card so close to your chest. You didn't really have cards to play in that perspective. And I think that that's also, for example, what sometimes, both sides of the coin in sales and procurement get wrong is that negotiation doesn't need to be contentious. It doesn't need to be a winner and a loser. Sometimes it could just be a structured conversation, and it's best done with a lot of insight and prep before that conversation. But something that you hit on there, which I think is super interesting, is the tactic of choosing to be able to offer to be a customer of choice because you obviously weren't at that point in time, but you probably have did the steps and put in the work to trying to become one of the future. So I think that that's a
Yeah.
super interesting anecdote. Do you have a another anecdote to be able to share with our listeners that comes to mind?
Yeah, so a win now.
Yeah,
So,
great.
um, same company now I'm stuck on this particular company I was at. So same company, we were going into a major CRM, renewal, and we were experiencing a ton of growth, but
Mm.
and the supplier knew. Every supplier at the time knew. We were very in the open with our growth, and we were a very well-known tech company. And we were, heading right towards IPO and everyone knew it. And so there was leverage there, but there was also maybe not as much because everyone knew what was going on with us. Um,
Right.
so not a ton of cards I could play necessarily. Um, but what this CRM provider didn't realize was that we actually weren't using quite a few of the SKUs that we had purchased from them. It had nothing to do with our
Mm.
growth. It actually just wasn't the right fit for us. It wasn't the thing we needed. So we went into this, they were thinking we were going to totally increase everything because we're on this just hyper growth path.
Right.
And I actually asked for some reductions. And now we all know, as much as we try to say there's no emotions in business, there's a ton of emotions in business, and you could tell
Sure.
that the sales team was very upset that what they thought was going to happen wasn't going to happen. I'm sure they created a narrative internally around this already, et cetera. And so contention immediately because we were reducing in some areas. So what I actually did was partnered internally with my head of revenue, my FP&A partner. All right, let's get really strategic about this growth. How can we just not sort of throw out a number, but how can
Mm.
we work with them to actually go like, here's how we're gonna grow, right? So we worked up both
Yeah.
the shelving and the tranching system. So we had some pre-commits. We did prepay for some licenses, but we knew we were going to use them and it actually didn't hurt us that much. I was able to leverage that into a discount. So it was almost net zero at that point, the discount versus
Mm.
paying ahead for things. But the tranche was amazing. We were able to say, hey, We're going to commit to these licenses. We'll pull them when we need them and we'll pay for them when we need them as well. But we're going to lock in that rate right now to do that. Yeah, so it was a commitment to growth without having to pay for it upfront. I leveraged my head of revenue. She had an in at the CRM company, so we were both talking. She was back channeling while I was the face of it, but she was very clear from the get, like, you are going through KR for all of this. I'm here to do you a favor, and I think that's a big thing too, right? Is like, hey, if we're going to introduce someone in leadership to also help us on this, we have to frame that as we're doing you a favor by allowing you to have this conversation. This is not a way for you to come over the top on procurement or to get around procurement. This is a kindness I'm doing for you. Um, but so we ended up with a 3-year deal. It was, around $10 million, the total deal. It was one of, at the time, their biggest deals of the quarter, and a big thing for them to hang their hat on. So, with us getting creative with how we wanted to approach growth, they no longer were super ticked off about the reductions that we were making. And we took the time to
Right.
also sit with them and explain to them why it didn't make sense, right? They had their narrative about why it absolutely made sense and we needed these things and all of the other things. We pulled data, we created a story, and we were able to really articulate to them, like, no, it actually doesn't make sense. But that doesn't mean that we're just reducing our partnership. We're actually growing over here. So why are we so mad at each other? Let's get this deal done and
Right.
like create equal wins. So they got a big win, biggest deal for them. We got a big win by decreasing, but also not having to spend out of our nose for licenses that we needed in the future.
Fantastic. And again, just another proof point of the commercial creativity that procurement can be able to come with when, again, willing to be able to put in the work,
Mhm.
understand an agreement, understand a supplier's business model, and also modes of operating within a negotiation. I love that particular anecdote as well, and hope to never meet you in a negotiation as a software and AI provider, I myself as well. All right, KR, let's get to what the one of the questions that I love asking people that have been in the space for some time now, right? You've been in the space for the last 10 to 15 years, and squarely then working, in a lot, I would say a few different eras of what procurement was. You just mentioned back in the early 2000s when you first kind of got into procurement. Was that kind of the time frame that you started that path of project management into procurement, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
you know if you were to break it down in a few eras, let's say for example early 2000s into the mid 2000s, late 2000s, 2010s, and then 2020s, kind of what would you say are, for example, kind of the, yeah, kind of the eras that you've went through, if you were to break it down into those kind of distinct eras?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say my market research era was my cutting the teeth era. It is where
Mm,
I went from like infancy into understanding what procurement and sourcing actually is and what they do. It was
yeah.
my era of getting really comfortable with data, right? Especially back then, we don't have the tools and technology that we have now. So,
No.
having to get really intimate with data and spreadsheets and understanding what things mean. So that, yeah, cutting my teeth through my educational era was definitely my market research years. That's also
Uh,
where I learned about a lot about sales. I was traveling with our
uh,
sales team and telling our
uh,
clients what our procurement services could do and demonstrating, hosting demos of our platform and things like that. So, I didn't realize at the time, like, hey, I'm a procurement person, but I'm actually doing a lot of sales stuff right now
right.
as well. So that was my education era. Also did a stint in market research for a couple major consulting organizations, and I would say that was probably my learning how to keep my mouth shut era.
Interesting.
I think, um, there's a maturation that happens, right, in along your career where at first I think my opinions are so important, and I'm
Right.
smart, and every people ask for my opinion, so I should just give it so honestly. That was my area of learning when people actually are asking for your real opinion and when they're asking you to
Huh,
agree with them.
huh.
And I think that is part of it. And that's still part of, I think, procurement today is while I want us to be at the forefront of everything, look, sometimes we gain more by smiling and nodding at something that actually has no consequence for us, right? If it has no consequence for
Fair
us,
point.
I'm gonna let that one go, and I'm gonna smile and nod, I'm gonna keep my mouth shut, and we'll see how it nets out later. Um,
Yeah,
in terms of technology, when I enter technology, I would say that was my, like, comeuppance era. Like, my era of really becoming the procurement person I wanted to be, of understanding how to negotiate very well, how to be mutual in those negotiations, how to work in a spirit of transparency. My previous, roles and industries, we were very guarded, and that was just not the
mhm,
norm. And it
mhm.
was win at any cost sort of thing. And so it was my era of like unraveling some really bad habits and like stepping into being a people first procurement person, and really focusing on the business versus just the function of procurement. Moving into procure tech was my era of becoming the people leader I always wanted to be.
Very
Um,
exciting.
yeah, very exciting and building on that people first mentality. And, the first procure tech company I worked for, one of our main pillars and values was everything comes from a place of kindness. Everything you do, everything you say, you are doing and saying with kindness. And that is something that I have tried very hard to hold on to. It's something I say to people I work with all the time, like, hey, let's take a step back. Are we being kind with how we're approaching that? And again, people first. If you are good to people, people overwhelmingly will be good back to you. There's always one. In every crowd, there's always one. But if
Yeah,
you are good, goodness will come back. And then I would say now where I'm at, like it's my era of um like really planting my flag in what I think procurement needs to be going forward, who we are, what our brand is, how we operate, and ensuring that people feel like they have the space to do that. And if you're going into companies and you're interviewing and you're saying, hey, we need to be people centric and savings, of course, are very important, but these other things are important as well. And that company is saying, no, no, make your choice, of course. Everyone hopefully is an adult making their own choice when they're getting a job. But I would say overwhelmingly, we as procurement need to start rejecting those handout. Just nope, no, thank you. Not the right fit. That's not how procurement is. So thank you, but good luck with your search for someone who's right for you. The more of us that actually stay what procurement is and how we're going to operate in the company, the more that's going to happen. The more we keep acquiescing to whatever CFO's pipe dream of, always just kneecapping people to get the best deal, the more that's going to be our reality. So we can either start saying no and start controlling our reality and controlling where procurement's going, or we can keep just letting it happen to us.
it's a fantastic place to end, and I think owning our own narrative in whatever, the industry or the function that we're in, and particularly procurement, owning their narrative of what procurement of the future means is incredibly important. And as you said, procurement too can come from a position of kindness. And I
Mhm.
think that you showed that to our listeners today with a lot of great insights. Thank you so much, KR, for joining from today's episode. Before we round off, wanted to be able to do a quick fire round with you, which we do with all of our guests, asking some quick questions about absolutely nothing procurement and all about you, KR. All right?
Ooh,
Sound like a
yeah,
plan?
sure.
All right, fantastic. Um, if you did not work in procurement, what could you see yourself doing?
I would be a CIA agent.
A CIA agent?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay, wow. Very
Yep.
cool. Then I actually need to ask, because I'm assuming that this is the case, do you have a favorite kind of cop detective series that you go to?
Honestly, Homeland, I think, is one of the best
Mm.
shows that was ever created, and that yeah, I mean, I was a bit older when that came out. I had always wanted to be a CIA agent before that, but I think, you know, growing up in the '80s and '90s, there were a lot of, like, spy thrillers and things in that time,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the influence was strong.
Very cool. Very cool. All expenses paid trip. You're able to go tomorrow. You can go with family and friends, or you can just go by yourself. Kodiak's floating the bill. Where are you heading?
Oh gosh. Oh, how is that a quick one? Like, does anyone ever actually just answer that? Like, no.
Top of the head, top of the head.
I would say Croatia.
Mm.
Croatia is probably always top of mind, one of the first places I wanna go to every time.
Very nice, very nice. Is there a podcast that you're listening to often, and or a book on your bedside table, excuse me, that you're reading at the moment, and or that you come back to, personal and or professional, that you could give our listeners as tips?
Yeah. I listen to a lot of the procurement podcasts, so I don't wanna call one out in particular because I think that there's quite a few, that could be helpful for people. But, so non-professional, I would say very honestly, I love the SmartList podcast. I It's Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes. Hilarious. I love their banter. I also
Yeah.
am a fan of Giggly Squad. That now judge me all you want for that, but I just love it because it's nonsense. And I think oftentimes when I'm trying to get entertained, I want nonsense. And then books. I don't read a ton of professional books. I do, of course, especially when one is recommended. But I would say, very honestly, we were just talking about this book, and I come back to it all the time. There's 2, Bridge to Terabithia and Tuck Everlasting. I go back to those books. They are children's books, but I think they teach very valuable life lessons.
And I think that that's why they're for children, because it's at the beginning of our lives, right? So for me, I think that that's awesome to be able to revisit those same laurels that you learn in those periods. Um, we have a saying in Swedish, paradrätt, which means the dish that I could be able to make for you for dinner, and I know it's my go-to, and it's going to be able to, really excite anyone that comes over for dinner, and they're going to enjoy it, and I'm going to enjoy making it. If I come over for dinner, what's the paradrätt that you're serving?
Yeah. Probably my abuela's rice and beans, maybe a
Mm,
little, ropa vieja. Like, I mean, like, it's probably going to be very much so something that, my abuela, made for me, and something that, we
nice.
still make as a family today.
That's nice. And if coming from, it sounds like from a place of authenticity. And thank you for sharing that authenticity with our listeners today, KR. If people want to be able to get in touch with you, learn more about the services that you're providing at Logic Source, or like, what's the easiest way to be able to do so?
LinkedIn. Hit me up on LinkedIn. If I'm traveling, I maybe won't get back to you same day, but I tend to be rather responsive. So, add me, connect with me on LinkedIn, message me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people, so I'm always around.
Well, thank you for connecting with us today, KR. Appreciate your time.
Anytime.